Whoa, and away we go. I do apologise. That video was a little bit heavier than I thought it was going to be. A bit of delay. So let me bring you up to speed on all the things you missed. Going again, happy days. This is why we do podcasts, because you can't see the mistakes I'm making right now. G'day, and welcome back to season 2021 of the Whisky Roundtable. For those of you who missed the video introduction there, which is all of us, let me give you a little bit of insight into what has happened in the past 7 or 8 weeks while we've been away. Milne, Andrew Milne, sitting down there in the bottom right-hand corner of your screens if you're watching live, spent Christmas alone, all by himself, separated from his family. That's what he did. Matt Bailey has spent the last 7 or 8 weeks planning his costume changes, and right up to 5 seconds ago, he was wearing a different shirt. Alex Dahlenburg made friends with a lizard in her time away, and I spent a bit of it in lockdown after being involved in a COVID cluster. They stuck things up my nose, and I came back negative. It is my great pleasure to welcome you back
Serves
to
you right for going to BWS.
to back to the roundtable to get it all off and running. It is big. We are going to have a very big year. We've got sponsors coming on board. That's about it. We might launch a podcast if I can figure out how to do it. That's about it. But what we do have is very, very special guests all throughout the year. We're kicking off 2021 with arguably the biggest guest we've had so far this year. People thought you could only make that joke in the first week of the year. I'm making it all the way in February.
Hey. My dad takes the cake. I'm sorry, Becky.
This year. I said this year. So I think before we go too much further, I think nothing says more about a person than their email signature. So to introduce Becky to the stream, I might just rattle off parts of that email signature. IWSC Communicator of the Year 2020, Icons of Whisky Communicator of the Year 2020, About Time's Top 10 Women to Watch in Drinks, and Spirit Awards for Best Cocktail Spirits Whisky something Festival 2020 finalist, finalist winner 2020, all that sort of stuff. Becky, welcome to the stream, and I know that's a pretty exemplary list of achievements there, but surely being the first guest on the 2021 stream of this is right up the top there.
Well, all of that stuff you just listed off is now out of date, technically. So this is this will pride a place. Yeah. The rest of that can just do one. This is it.
We are rewriting
the achievement
live as we speak.
Dahlenburg for president. God.
Quick g'day to everyone watching on the various streams. To Kirsten, to Ryan, to Daniel, and to Jesse. Everyone saying g'day. We'll get to that quickly, but. Becky, you're obviously calling in from the UK, having your 8:30 a.m. morning dram. Whereabouts are you in the world?
So I live in Brighton, which is on the south coast of England in the UK. It's not London. It's about an hour south of London, on the beach. The whole of the UK was blanketed in snow recently, except for Brighton, because I don't know why. So Brighton is the gay capital of the UK. It's the home of Fatboy Slim and cool people like me.
It is. I am glad you actually classified that, because if you go an hour south of Sydney, for example, you're still in Sydney. If you go an hour south of Melbourne, you get wet, but technically you're still in Melbourne. But yeah, so you are in lockdown at the moment over there in the UK, which is never fun. We've all experienced that in various elements here in Australia. But how's it looking at, and particularly from maybe the hospitality and that sort of world? How are those guys going over there at the moment?
Oh wow! So gosh, how long has hospitality been locked down for? We went into this bizarre tier system where different areas of the UK were like allowed to open or not allowed to open depending on like the COVID risk. In Brighton, we were London, I think, was in one of the strictest tiers since maybe early December. In Brighton, we were still allowed to go out for drinks up until Christmas. After Christmas, basically the entire of the UK has just shut down completely. It's looking like schools aren't going back until March time, I think. And hospitality is rumoured to not be allowed to reopen until May, which is dangerous. So basically at the moment, there's also this law where landlords cannot evict their tenants. There's like a blanket rule on that. So a lot of hospitality workers who've obviously not been able to pay their rent, or if they're still safe and not being able to be evicted, that ends the end of this month. Yet hospitality is not being reopened until probably May. So there's a bit of an issue there. I think there'll be a lot of people who are maybe in trouble. And also the airports are closed. No one can go anywhere. So if you're an overseas bar worker, then you can't go back home.
Unless you're an influencer, where I gather you can go to Dubai and do your fitness program from Dubai, because your online fitness plan needs to be done from a nice location rather than home.
Well, obviously.
Andy, I didn't know you followed the Geordie Shore guys like I do.
Oh, every day. They're my fans.
I had an interesting conversation today. There was a certain whiskey has been announced in maybe an Asian country quite famous for whiskey and rarity at the moment. And, getting calls all day long, and then, call the supplier and that's sort of, look, mate, I just need an answer. When is it coming? Is it not? It's like, it's a global travel retail exclusive. It's like, it's a what? It's like, okay, so what do we do here? Do I buy a ticket and hang out in Sydney Airport for a bit and then walk around the other side and buy it on the way out? So that's an interesting thing going on at the moment.
Kudos to anyone that is releasing, GTR releases. It's up there with ambition.
All right, should we kick it off? Becky,
let's
for
kick it
the
off.
people at home, tell us how you started and where you got to where you are right now, because Scotty read off your wonderful list of credentials and all your badass accolades. So how'd you get started?
I had a dream.
That is the best answer we've had for that question so far.
Is this the start of our musical? Are we now?
I dreamed a dream. Time's gone by.
I had a dream. That's my thing. That's enough. No, actually, do you know what? I wanted to be a film critic. I'm a big film geek. That's what I did for my degree. I'm a film geek. I'm a gamer. I'm just a big nerd, basically. But so I did a journalism postgraduate diploma after I finished university with the aim of becoming a film critic, but that didn't work out. It turns out getting into film is much harder than being a female whiskey writer. So that didn't work out. And actually, it was very difficult to find a role just after coming out of university. I ended up working in a lot of different bars and restaurants. So I did make cocktails for quite a long time, for a few years. Was managing a restaurant during university. So I do know how to make a few cocktails, and I do know how to pour a pint of Guinness, which is a very important life skill, I think. But I ended up loving... Yes, and I ended up loving the hospitality industry. So that was actually my first job, was writing about hospitality for a B2B publication based in the UK called Big Hospitality. Terrible name for a website. I don't know why they never changed it. It still exists. But and it was kind of the website of Restaurant Magazine and the World's 50 Best Restaurant Awards. So I ended up navigating more towards writing about food. And I mean, I've managed to travel the world, eating in some incredible places. I've been in Sydney even and eaten at Key, which was like a highlight. It was absolutely incredible. Attica in Melbourne as well. I don't know if that's still open or not.
Great spot. Great place. Yeah.
I'm quite jealous as the person that lives here and hasn't either. It's all right. Carry on.
Sorry, Andy. Well,
No, keep rubbing it in.
No,
Keep rubbing it in. It's great.
I see. I was one of the original influencers. They were just invited to come in and eat for the sake of a few photos. And back then, that was like, Instagram and Facebook didn't exist, so it was like easy to do. But then I just sort of moved. I transitioned a bit more into the drink side and became deputy editor of the Spirits Business magazine, which is an international trade magazine. And then from there moved into scotchwhisky.com as editor. And now I'm freelance because scotchwhisky.com went under just before COVID. So, which was great timing because it meant I went freelance at a time when everything shut down and there was no government support for new freelancers. So when all of the work dried up and everybody else was like, oh, it's cool, yeah, I'm just on furlough, I was like, I have no work, no money. But yeah, you just got to carry on in whatever way you can, I suppose. And my kind of way of coping with the shit show that was thrust upon us was to raise money for charity. So that's what I did. So our Whisky, which is a platform I launched a couple of years ago in 2018 with Georgie Bell, who at the time was the global malts ambassador for Bacardi. We launched our Whisky, and during that was kind of a platform to try and flip this stereotypical image of whiskey being a man's drink on its head. We've been going for a couple of years, and then during lockdown, I established the Our Whisky Festival, which is the first in the UK to actually get whiskey in front of people during that COVID lockdown thing. And now everyone's doing festivals and tastings and everything, but I was the first, I'll have you know, I was the first, and it was bloody hard. Miniature bottles around the UK while like nothing was being shipped and everything was shut down. So yeah, that kind of brings me up to this really, and what I'm doing now is not a lot. I'm still in lockdown, so it's just again battling and trying to do something with my time. I hope that answered your question, Alex.
No, it did. I'm just wondering because it actually goes into one of the questions we wanted to ask you with what are your plans with Our Whisky?
I knew you'd ask that. And so we have plans. We have plans.
It's actually Andy wanted to know. Andy put it in the list of questions.
Did you know we were?
Well, Andy knows me so well.
An email to you.
Andy knows me so well. So if anyone's watching who doesn't know, we used to work together in the same office. We didn't work together, apart from some of the whiskey shows where I used to drive you insane. But that's the most.
Well, you came. It was always good fun. Like I was there. So the day that ScotchWhisky.com launched, it was part of Specialty Drinks, the wider family. So I was there in the office the day that the website went live, and we had some very good whiskies afterwards to celebrate that launch. But as a result, afterwards, for every whiskey show, we had an amazing stand for ScotchWhisky.com. And it became harder and harder each year to break what we'd done the previous year to make it better and more fantastical. But what was always fun was digesting what you said. It's like, this is our idea. It's like, we want to do this. And I'd had to sort of take it whilst organizing 60 other distillers who I normally just say, here's your stand, do what you do and tell me what you're going to do. And then Becca's like, yeah, we want to do this. How do we do this? And it was just always this fun game of sort of taking this very crazy idea that was amazing, but putting it into reality and sort of helping actually shape it out. And so it was great fun. I did love that because it actually, for once, it did give me a chance to be a part of the event itself because I was actually inputting in one of the stands. And I was very jealous when I then left the UK and then saw some of the stuff you did. I was just like, God damn it. I was like, I wish I was part of that. And I was like, that is awesome. So, yeah,
well, they did like some of the concepts. I think we started off with, so ScotchWhisky.com was given a stand at the Whisky Show every year because obviously it was part of the group. And the first year when we launched, we created a ton of miniatures, the editor's choice miniature, and we were giving one out for free to everybody who came to the show. So you got a little token on the way in and you swapped it on the ScotchWhisky.com stand. It was a way of getting people to come to our stand so they could actually see that we existed. And within about 4 weeks, those miniatures were being flipped for £10 within a week. Ridiculous.
Of course they were. Yeah.
Ridiculous.
On our the company's website as well. It's just like profit at every stage. It's fine. It's good. It's good. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. We had some great concepts. There was the garden, the secret garden sessions. We created a garden within the Whisky Show. Were you part of that one that year?
Yeah, we did gardens and we did a phone booth as well.
Sorry, phone party?
Like a
not a phone.
Yeah, no,
we did a booth where people used to come in and describe the whiskies that they were tasting, and the early on in the day, there were some really great videos of people talking about whiskey and being really descriptive and interesting, and we got some of the amazing master distillers. So people like Bill Lumsden and David Turner, and I can't even think of names now, but some of the top distillers in the world that were walking into this room and talking about different whiskies. And then you get to the ones that are about an hour before close, and it's someone that's been there for 6 hours, just going, "It's lovely. I'm getting, sweetness." I'm like, fuck, is that can't.
All right. So
that was. Wait, what was the question?
Yeah.
What are your plans? What are your plans for our whiskey?
Just I will say good day to a couple of people. To Bree Atwood, who's listening in the Atwoods from Backwards.
Hi,
G'day, and hi to Becky. And Joel Eastman actually recently drank one of those miniatures. And can you confirm or deny that the editor's choice was Glenfarclas?
It was an unnamed distillery, but your sources may be not that far off the truth.
Yeah. And Joel Eastman, to put in context, is a friend of ours from the UK, but is also a former Oak Barrel employee.
OG Oak Barrel.
Ooh.
And when people come into the Oak Barrel and they say, "Hey, Scott, you've done a really great job with this whiskey department," I kind of laugh and be like, it was actually Dave Withers that did this and I just inherited it. And when people used to come in and say to Dave Withers, "Hey, you did a really good job with this whiskey department," he'd go, and laugh and take the credit. It was actually Joel. So I'm taking all the credit for what Joel did a little while ago. So thank you, Joel. But yes, about 10 minutes ago, we did ask a question about the plans for our whiskey and maybe as well what it is for people at home who may not be familiar with it.
Okay. So our whiskey is, as I say, a few years ago, we launched it as a platform or a campaign, I suppose, to try and challenge this stereotypical image of whiskey being a man's drink. And I suppose the reason why George and I decided to found this is just because we got so fed up of always being asked whether we knew anything about whiskey, whether we even liked whiskey, whether we needed to have water in our whiskey, because obviously being women, we couldn't handle it at like neat strength. And bearing in mind, both of us have distilling qualifications. Georgie has a diploma in distilling and I've got a GCD, and I was the first journalist to even have that. And we've both been working in whiskey for years and years. Yet the general perception is you're a woman, you do not know anything about whiskey, and obviously there's an age thing there as well. So we decided to launch this, to launch our whiskey, and we were blown away by how much support it had from the off. It was very clear that we'd created a movement and something which was very much needed. So over the last few years, we've just been really promoting content on social media, doing speaking events, and even, to be honest, at speaking events, we've had times where we'll take to the stage and half the room will stand up and walk out because they're not interested in listening to women talking about gender and representation in whiskey, and all men, by the way, obviously. We've had one scenario was when we were speaking at an event in the Cotswolds, a whiskey forum, and we were deemed by one of the organisers that we weren't interesting enough to be part of the main lineup. So we were removed from the schedule, despite being invited on there. We were removed from the schedule and told that we could only speak after dinner, which was 11 o'clock at night after a whole day of drinking and eating, and everyone was tired and bored. So that was a highlight. So we've spent years being not listened to. We've had we've spoken to a few companies in private. There was a really big one which hit a big Facebook group in Australia, actually. I think it was a women's bartending group on Facebook. which really highlighted some of the misogynistic, quite horrific, and in one case quite rapey content that one Australian/Scotch whisky brand was putting out, and that kind of went nuts. But thankfully, because we'd been speaking to this brand for months leading up to this point, and they were not changing any of their content or their tact or anything like that. So it needed a kind of group effort of people saying this is not okay. So since then, we've been having conversations with different companies, but we've just still not been taken seriously until September last year, when I put something out on my socials, which kind of blew up and went a bit nuts. And since then, whiskey companies are now listening, and they've seen that it was the response to that post from the wider whiskey community that made people go, oh, actually, there is a widespread problem here that we need to do something about. And really, since then, it's been the response that I had to that post from women in the global whiskey community. So maybe women who've just started as working in a whiskey shop or behind a bar, all the way through to brand ambassadors and even some of the most respected master blenders and distillers. I had so many messages, hundreds of messages from women all over the world saying thank you for saying something and telling me their own personal stories of sexist remarks and misogynistic comments and inappropriate behavior, and they're all sick of it, and they're just like, this needs to stop, so thank you for saying something, because it seems like the industry is now listening. So going forwards, what we want to do with our whiskey is to really we have got some plans which I'm not ready to talk about yet, I'm sorry, but we do have
just have to have you back a little bit later on.
But we do have plans to, I think, with everything that I want to do with our whiskey going forward, it's to really help all of those women that messaged me following September to try to change the whiskey industry, to make it a much more comfortable, welcoming place for women to feel that they can work in that environment and that they can succeed. And ultimately that, it might not happen in our generation, but at some point, that a woman can walk into a whiskey bar or even just a regular bar, order a whiskey and not be asked, do you want water with that?
Yeah.
Are you sure? That's the goal. So we've got some plans, and it will be evolving, and there'll be a lot of speaking with whiskey companies privately through consultory manner. Am I saying that right? So there's a lot of that coming. So to give you an idea, March 2018, so it was International Women's Day when we launched in 2018, and that's coming up again next month. So expect to see something from us next month at least anyway, and it should be quite a big splash.
Do you mind asking, Becky, just on that last point, do you find some of the challenges here, do you find the biggest challenges vary in culturally or geographically? As in, like, as you said, there was a bit of traction in that discussion, and that was around an Australian brand or an Australian whiskey, but it was a Scottish brand.
Okay, so sorry,
Australian
people.
It's a Scotch brand that is owned by an Australian company.
That narrows it very much down.
I know. And it may, I'm going to hazard a guess and maybe say it isn't the particularly distillery's name, but maybe their entry to market and some of the advertising around that.
It's not a single malt.
No,
it's not a single malt.
But it's But you find the challenges are much more cultural or geographical? Do you like the changes, the variation in that?
I think what's important to understand is that obviously different cultures are very different around the world. So I was told yesterday that apparently in Poland, whiskey drinkers are 50-50 male-female, which I had no idea actually that was the case. But the marketing in Poland is very skewed towards being targeted at men specifically. Even though there's that kind of balance of male-female drinkers. I think obviously different cultures have different understandings, I guess, of who is allowed to drink. And obviously there are very traditional markets where it is the the male is still the breadwinner of the family. They're the ones going out earning the money. So therefore, as a culture, they're the ones who are allowed, and it's socially acceptable for them to go and be drinking, especially something as aspirational as whiskey or scotch in bars, etc. So it's very different. So in some markets, they will still continue to just target men in their advertising because that's their traditional drinker. That's who they're going for. But in markets like the UK, the US, Australia, I guess more developed liquor markets, I suppose, it's I just don't understand why this perception still exists, and it shouldn't do, because obviously, as we know, as you guys know, anyone who runs a bar or sells whiskey knows that women do actually enjoy whiskey. I think it's a fallout from traditional advertising, which always targeted that male consumer, and that's kind of drip fed through our cultures, so through television and film. Anybody who's writing a script for TV or film will write in that the guy's drinking a whiskey and the girl's drinking a gin and tonic or a martini, because that's a gender is playing into this stereotype, like all characters are stereotypes. And even now, when we're seeing women drinking whiskey being portrayed on film or TV, they're shown as being a bad girl, like a badass, and that's or an alcoholic. So like Jessica Jones, for instance, I'm thinking Bad Girls as well. Mila Kunis drinking her whiskey. It's only ever the bad girl that drinks whiskey, and then that's then created this whole wave of content. You can Google this. A number of articles online which talk about 10 reasons why you should date a woman who drinks whiskey, and there's just this stream of misogynistic bullshit about how she walks with swagger and she's a bad girl really, but she knows how to take her liquor, and it's just gross. And this all comes from 1960s 1970s traditional whiskey marketing. So it's I think it's endemic across those kinds of traditional markets, but I think it will take time and it will take baby steps, and I think once the traditional markets start to correct the imbalance, then those newer markets will start to notice that too and follow on. But I don't think it's going to happen in our life.
Do you see that as generational? Because like I'm 100% looking at yourself and Alex in this, but from when I look back at when I started in the industry, there were very few females working in our industry, and I remember joining the Whisky Exchange. And I sat on the floor, and there were 10, 11 people on my floor, and all men, and all predominantly middle-aged. Love you all, but you were all middle-aged. But I joined that sort of group, and I was sort of the younger person, and it was all middle-aged white men, and that was kind of the category. And within 2 years of me being in that company, I'd say 30%, 40% of our floor was female, and it was I remember thinking it was quite weird coming from wine to whiskey that there was no women on our in our business really at all in the sort of working aspect, and all of a sudden there were, and it was kind of like cool, we've sort of slowly balancing that aspect, but that's at the level where you and I are at, where it's just like, we're working our way through and up the industry at various different ages. But we're the younger generation of this industry. Do you think it's a case that when that older generation stopped being as relevant as our generation, that we gain that voice of gender equality, and actually sort of we're all, you're less likely, and I suppose, Alex is probably quite prominent to you. It's like, do you find that this idea and concept of, men looking at women going, what do you know? Is that an age aspect, or does it still filter down to, our generation?
Well, I think that there are 2 points in there. So one is that unconscious bias is the root cause here. So it's people who are making an assumption based on a stereotype that they have in their head, but they're not really thinking about it. It's unconscious. So they're forming an opinion about something based on things that they've seen. It's an impression that they've created. They're not thinking about that. And both men and women can have unconscious biases. So, and old and young people as well. And there are so many ways of like looking at that. So I think having one really key part of making any kind of change is unconscious bias training, and to always be consciously thinking about, well, where's my representation here? Who am I speaking to? Why? I trying not to make assumptions about somebody based on whatever preconceived ideas that you have. The other point is that, yes, I agree that there is, again, it kind of feeds into this unconscious bias thing, but if you have a team of older people who've been doing a certain job or working in this industry for a long amount of time, they've already set in their ways, they've already got their perception of who their whiskey drinker is and the way things should work and the way things should run. And this is why actually building more diversity into the workplace is a great idea, not only because it's ethically right, but it makes good business sense, because a more diverse team is more creative, it's more productive, they work better together. You've got people not just in terms of like color, like race or gender or anything like that, or even sexual orientation, even down to things like, where did you grow up? Where are you from? What are your interests? That person's into cars, that person's into film, that person's into ballet. And bringing all of these ideas and interests together makes a more diverse team, which then informs the next generation and the evolution of said industry. So I think now we're at a turning point in whiskey. And as you said, like seeing our floor at the Whiskey Exchange completely change. And I remember seeing that too. I think when I started, actually, the girls' bathroom on the second floor, the girls' bathroom on the second floor was full of hairspray and toothbrushes and makeup and deodorant and that kind of stuff, because there were the girls who ran London Cocktail Week were up there, and then there was me. And that was it. So there were I think it was three of them.
Three of them, yeah.
At that point. There were three of them, and then me, and that was it. So in terms of people using that bathroom, it was like, oh yeah, they just kept all of their stuff in there because no one's gonna like use it.
Yeah.
But then I do remember over it took maybe a couple of years, but then that floor did start to evolve and change, and there were a lot of women hired.
And across every department as well. It was, it was in web design, it was in the designing team, it was in the editorial team. It was, it was a great change to see. But it's also, just because we're changing here, unfortunately, didn't mean that consumer perception was changing. But it's great that it's there's a voice for it, and that. We just, as long as we all sit there and call it out, then I think, there's a place for it. But
Bailey, were you going to jump in there?
No, Alex was, and sorry,
Sorry.
It's a little bit of a question related to your studies, which I only found out through Andy, that you had done your distilling degree. Can you tell me about what made you jump to do that decision? Because I'm at that point too, and I really need that advice, because I keep being told, don't worry about it. Personally, I wanted to do it for a little bit of street cred, if that makes sense, to sort of justify that I might know what I'm talking about.
You're the only one in the group that actually wants to become a distiller. So
Give a bit of context here. This is a bit of a running thing. When you ask this group who wants to be a distiller, there's only one person that puts their hand up, because the other three think it's reasonably hard work. So your answer to this question is not only going to inspire Alex to yay or nay, but it's also going to, I think, maybe fortify our belief that, yes, that sounds like too much hard work.
I watched Becky do it. I know it's too much hard work.
I can't wait. It was like
which qualification do you have your eye on?
I'm looking at Harriet Watt at the moment. There's one through there.
Okay.
There's also one done through Tasmania, which I am not overly sold on yet. It's a certificate, not actually a degree. So I've looked through Harriet Watt. I've just started getting all the packages sent over to me to finally maybe do it.
So that's general
Bachelor of Brewing and Distilling. Yeah.
Okay, so the one that I did was the General Certificate in Distillation, which was through the Institute of Brewing and Distilling. So it's a different body to Harriet Watt, but the pathway would be you've got the foundation, then the General Certificate in Distilling, so the GCD, then there's a diploma, and then you could go on to do a Harriet Watt degree as well, or you can just skip all of those and do a degree if you're that confident in your science and maths and all of that kind of thing. So the reason why I decided to do a GCD is for the same reasons that you want to get your qualification, which is want to show people that I know what I'm talking about. I'd just taken on a role as editor of a very prominent Scotch whisky title, and I was forever being mistaken as Dave Broom's PA, which Andy probably remembers bothered me quite a lot because I was just cross. So I was just frustrated with never being taken seriously and decided to do the GCD. I was very fortunate in that Sukhinder, the owner of the Whisky Exchange, let me do that, and so he paid for me to do that. Otherwise, I think it was around £900 to do the course, which basically involved studying a manual on my own for a year, and then doing a 4-day course in Edinburgh to learn more about it, and then taking a multiple choice exam. It's hard. It was really hard. So the GCD is what most distillery operators gain when they're working within a company, and quite often the company will support the studying. If you're doing it on your own, it's much more difficult because you don't have that network of people to lean on, or the distillers to actually get the right answers, because they are looking for certain right answers. I'm so glad I did it. It gave me a better, deeper understanding. You may know all of this stuff already, but having that qualification helps. It's awful to say this, but as women, we do sometimes need to prove ourselves. So actually having that qualification helps show that you know what you're talking about. I certainly wouldn't be where I am now without it. I would say go for it. I also would say don't be put off by anything that seems hard, because as long as you put the work in, you're more than capable. And there are plenty of people around the world who would be very happy to support you and help guide you through anything like that at all. There were so many people I spoke to. Georgie Bell had done hers prior to me doing it. Actually, she was the one who suggested I do it because she had done her diploma. She got like the highest marks of anyone in the entire world that year. So she won a scholarship to the Worship
Of course she did.
or something.
Yeah.
That girl is so amazing.
She's amazing.
She encouraged me to do the ECD, and so I was lucky I had her to ask questions to, because there were like so many I had at that time. It was like, what's the difference between a lauter and a semi-lauter? Like, and this sort of stuff like comes up on this sort of stuff comes up on the exam, and that there were so many intricate questions. But yeah, there you go. I would say definitely do it.
Okay.
Do it.
I also think that some
100%.
distillers in Australia would be very, very happy that I did it, instead of asking them questions and pinning them up and continually going, if you need to end this conversation, your safe word is, just because I asked so many questions. So I kind of feel like this might give the Australian distillers a bit of a break.
It also put you in the top category of distillers in Australia if you had that qualification. There you go.
For those playing at home, maybe listening back on the podcast that don't have the visual aspect, I just want to make a quick comment to things that I'm seeing through this chat so far. And it was just in regards to Alex's face when Becky was talking about the bad girl of whiskey. I'm doing the inverted commas here. Her face lit up at that point in time. And then when the mention of maths and science came up, the face went down a little bit. So
bullshit. I love numbers. Well, you can't run like multiple hospitality venues and not love numbers. I spent all day doing spreadsheets and reports and forecasting and budgeting. Like, I love numbers. Science, maybe not so much.
That's not what I saw reading the face. That's not what I saw.
Yeah.
Couple of comments coming through. I want to say a quick g'day to Michelle and or Mark Burns from the Aisling Distillery out in Griffith. Say g'day, ladies and gents, to them. And Brie Atwoods from Yakandanda says, Alex, Lee has done it and would support you through it. Do it.
Thank you.
So I think that's a fairly well endorsement for doing it. But again, yes, that sounds like way too much hard work. And I work at the Oak Barrel, the greatest job in the world. So no, I will not be making it hard for myself. Bailey, I think you had a question before, if I was not mistaken, that you wanted to throw in there.
I already did. That's okay.
You did?
Yeah, it's okay.
That's right. So, I mean, it's interesting. Actually, there's something that's come through on the track as well, and I'm going to pick on Brie again, a comment that she made. In terms of the growth of craft distilleries in Australia, and Becky, I don't know how familiar you are with like the very micro distilleries that are popping up. A lot of them are run by couples. So they're obviously, generally for the most part a 50-50 split of male and female. And just on her Facebook following on the Backwoods Distillery, they have a 60-40 male-female split, which is kind of remarkable when you consider about generic following. And it actually reminded me of, in my previous life before the Oak Barrel, I ran a company called Dram Club with one of my best mates, Yvette Myhill, who now lives in the country, and we would have 50-50 or 60-40 female-male splits, I think because we had a female co-presenter and up there. And I've never been able to recreate that, that level. The tastings that I've run generally, for whatever reason, have been, male skewed. So I think that's quite an interesting point that, women in, the places of authority or expertise, will help that along as well, which I think is very much true.
I totally agree that the more women that we have in production roles, the better, really, because not only are they directing not only helping the direction of whiskey in terms of the flavour, the spirit, like exactly what we're doing, but they're also overseeing the marketing as well of how their company is being portrayed. What's important also to bear in mind is, yes, the perception will change the more women we have actually working in the industry, but we need to see that representation in communications as well. So I personally, I think there's a two-prong approach to changing the perception. One is the increase of women, and let's not forget people of colour as well, working in the industry. But the other one is making sure that there is representation of those people in communications, and that's how we change this perception. The role the media has to play in this is so important, because I think there is what's happening on Australia is incredible. Obviously, we're seeing that a similar kind of growth of craft distilling in the US as well, in the whiskey industry. And a lot of distilleries being managed by a husband and wife team. And I was speaking with a couple recently, and the wife was saying how frustrating it is always being referred to in an article as the owner's wife, when they're co-owners. And she's like, he does all the distillery production stuff, and she does most of the marketing side of things as well, but also has a hand in like spirit creation. She's just an add-on. And there's also like always a photo of the two of them, and it's distillery owner, his name, and his wife, her name. And it's frustrating for her. So I think there also needs to be some education done for the media, the general media. I think whiskey media understand this mostly. There are some exceptions, but that I think the whiskey media needs to know. But as I can't remember who said it, maybe it was Matt. It takes all this calling it out whenever we see it, and say something, do something about it. That's how we change the narrative.
I think you talk about media, like it's the way that we communicate from a whiskey perspective. You know, when you first started as a journalist, the main way of communicating to people was through magazines and through, proper journalism, as I would call it. And that was one of the reasons why I thought you were one of the most amazing sort of hires for the Whiskey Exchange, is because you actually were you were a journalist, and what you brought was journalism, not whiskey writing. But the great thing that I think great thing and negative thing is the way that we talk about whiskey now is evolved massively, and you can be a whiskey writer, a whiskey blogger, and so forth and everything, and everything is quite broad and diverse. And what's your opinion of how the journalism in whiskey has changed? And do you think it's better or worse? Do you think it's, obviously there's now not just 10 men writing articles, and so that's a big change. But how do you feel that the journalism in terms of writing about whiskey has developed? Do you think it's positive or still pretty fucked?
I think generally, let's talk about trade, so specialist journalists specialising in spirits first. I think that the standard of journalism has always been high for people who specialise in spirits and who have a journalism qualification. The problem is that, as we both know, publications that are run by journalists are dying because there is no support from the industry for them. There is a lack of financial support because brands would rather, they see more value in putting their money behind social media influencers and bloggers than actual journalists and actual publications. There's a whole raft of reasons why, but the problem with that is that actual publications, which are formed on a basis of impartiality, accuracy, integrity, they're dying because brands would rather use an influencer who just talks about their brand in the most positive, most amazing way in return for a bottle of free whiskey. And that's what we're seeing.
This is something
they're
that
saving money by not supporting magazines. Sorry,
this is something I struggle with right now, or I openly struggle with the influencer side of whiskey, rather than having that knowledge and base behind, or even an industry background with some of the, I suppose, posts that we're seeing these days. It's one of my big pet hates right now. I'd rather read articles about someone's experience and journey through it, like a journalist style of writing, rather than a cute little post on an Instagram with a face.
But it transcends to TV as well, unfortunately. And I think the TV personalities that are talking about spirits, I couldn't tell you a female personality talking about spirits. I don't know much about what TV shows about spirits in Australia, but in the UK, it's still white men. It's an ego thing, and we had an interesting conversation with my wife about this the other day. It's quite often the way that men approach things is like you fight, and they're a bit more egotistical from the outgo, so they sort of get noticed more, not necessarily for the right reasons, but they get noticed more and get things put forward more because they just shout at the top of their head first. And there's exceptions, Alex. I know that. I've
been watching a lot of Love and Hip Hop lately, and that show says otherwise to what you do.
No, I understand that, but I think generally that they get, men get put into these positions more because they're claiming something before they can actually claim it, which is a typical male statistical analysis. But it's frustrating to see that there's when there's zero representation on TV. You then TV is the main consumption of media, and then you go to journalism, and then you go to blogs. It's like, if we're not there, then how can we filter down? It's just I
think it's been interesting to watch the marketing, and a lot of what you've been speaking about, Becky, with if you are a whiskey or any sort of spirits or even alcohol company, and you run a marketing campaign, and you are not marketing, or you're exclusively marketing to males, you're not doing your fucking job, because there is a big market out there that want to spend money on the thing you're selling. Fucking market to them and do your job fucking properly. But
that's why I love you guys.
There's a good statistic here. Like 80% of household purchases are made by women. So if you're not marketing to the person who has the spending power within the household, what's the point?
What's the point?
You're missing out a huge chunk of potential sales or potential revenue. So that's your problem.
Alex, is that a throwdown sized Jack Daniels bottle you just
casual throwdown, Jack?
I did try really hard to put it in a glass before. I was like, Becky's here, I need to be proper. So I put it in a glass, and then without even thinking, the last time I just slugged it out of the bottle.
Your
and then it's done now. So.
Is half-size JD bottles now.
So to throw it away from quite a serious conversation that we've been having, as a journalist, you used to write a lot of, certainly at ScotchWhisky.com, you always were reviewing whiskies and analysing whiskies. How do you stay impartial in your analysis? Because it's a thing that's come up quite recently in terms of awards and award shows and like who wins and who doesn't and why do they win and why do they not?
Who votes?
And who votes?
We're not having that discussion.
We'll
to that one.
Push that out the side. But when you were very good at analysing whiskies and reviewing whiskies impartially, how do you do it? And what process do you go through to make sure that you're analysing this purely from fact and not from preference?
Just years of being a journalist, an impartial journalist, I guess. I mean, it helps to be. I don't have. So when I was editor of ScotchWhisky.com, I refused. I was approached by quite a lot of companies to do independent tastings or work with them or do consultation, and that was totally unethical. I was editor of a publication and you shouldn't be mixing the two. There are people out there who are editors of publications who are doing that, which I completely disagree with, because if you are in any way a journalist, and not all editors are journalists, let's say that too, then we need to, the understanding is you need to be impartial and you cannot be taking money on the side for doing other bits and pieces, because that goes against every single code. So everything I reviewed for ScotchWhisky.com was, yes, I knew what the product was, but I would take a approach of being like, well, let's just assess it in terms of how it actually is. So does it hit the marks right? Is it actually, is there anything wrong with it technically? How does it smell and taste? Is it well put together? And I'll do a mark based on actually what I think, because I'm not reviewing something for the company. I'm reviewing something for the consumer, for the people reading the review. Yeah. And if I'm not being true and honest about what that product tastes like, that ruins my integrity as a whiskey writer, because people then stop trusting me and my opinion. So it by playing into whatever I think a brand probably wants, that's going to ruin everything. And there are times where I've come across a whiskey and I'm like, there is something technically wrong with that. And I'll actually remove it from the reviews. I won't review it, because if there's a technical fault, I don't put that out there, because it's damaging for the brand. They probably got something's fault, and it's not right for them. People won't buy it. So what I would rather do is go directly straight to the brand and say, I've just tried this, I think there's a fault. Do you want to send me another sample just in case? And go through that kind of route. And the same thing happens as well with awards as well. So I've judged a few awards over the years through the spirits business and Whisky Magazine's awards and several others, and it's the same thing. If you smell or taste it, you're like, this is not right. And there have been times where they've sent in a bottle which is a show bottle, so the liquid inside is water with colouring.
we had that at the Gin Awards judging this year, the Australian Gin Awards, because you don't know, because it's gin, it's clear, and there was a bottle of water. Just like, this is very mild, this one, very mild.
Really subtle juniper. Really subtle.
10 out of 10 would recommend.
You could drink the whole bottle of this and it wouldn't get you drunk. Smooth as silk.
There's that word, it's smooth.
Sorry, Scotty, what were you going to say?
Impartiality. Sorry.
So I think that's excellent. And it's also well done to Andy and Becky for inadvertently provided me with an excellent segue into our next section, because I said we were going to have an hour long here, but we're going to go for an hour and 10 minutes if that's okay, Becky. And for those watching or maybe listening to the podcast, and Alex is drinking out of a half-size bottle of Jack Daniels, but Becky I think is the best because the size of her mug, it's a huge mug, and there's no telling me that that's just coffee. It's now 9 o'clock or 9:30 in the UK. There's a drop or two of whiskey in there, I'm pretty sure. But an excellent segue into what's going to be our final. We're going to end each episode with what we're going to this little segment here from our new sponsors of the car/slow/ whatever this booze up you want to call it, which is
whatever this shit show is, yeah.
Which is whiskyardent.com.au, which if you go to whiskyardent.com.au, it'll say under construction at the moment because it's taking a facelift. But it's actually a website based very much around what you guys have been talking about. If you're not familiar with my backstory, for some people watching, is I'm a newsman. I came from writing news and journalism before I got into whiskey. Unfortunately, that industry was going one way, and you can't download or copy and paste whiskey. So I sort of jumped ship and came over here. Jumped ship. It was pretty shit over there for a little while, but and it is very lacking. And the Scotchwhisky.com, long may it rest in peace, because it was an absolute outstanding.
I loved it.
So I still use it. To be fair, it's still live. I still use it as a reference point.
Yeah.
Outstanding source of bias, and I love all the blogs that pop up, but for just actual news and that sort of clear information, particularly from a market like Australia, where we get things 6 months late, we need to be informed about that and what's actually coming here.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. But one thing that that website introduced before it went a little bit quiet last year was a thing called the Whiskey Proust Questionnaire. For those who may be familiar, the Proust Questionnaire is an old parlour game by Marcel Proust. You can say Proust if you want. I say Proust because I'm Australian. So the Proust Questionnaire was adapted to whiskey. So at the end of each episode, we're going to pick one question at random. I say at random, but obviously not. I'm going to pick it. And one question to our special guest, which then may be answered by the rest of the group as well. But the question I picked out from the Proust Questionnaire, which I think makes sense to Becky and your career, and is, what word or phrase do you overuse when talking about whiskey?
Oh.
I know all of these three, my three roundtable guests, I know.
Oh, really? I'm intrigued.
Really?
You're going to have to go before us.
Yeah, I might kick us off then. What word or phrase do you overuse when talking about whiskey? For me is, just not liquid though, is it?
That's good. But it's liquid.
No, I soft and round my overused ones. I use soft and round way too much.
I
want to hear what Scotty's guess is though of ours.
Okay, I didn't think this one.
Yeah, you put your foot in.
I just trying to be smart ass there. To be fair.
Yeah, gotcha.
I now work with a lot more bourbon, and like it's always the thing. Like when you start, and I was the same when I was in wine. Like I had words that I attached myself to in wine. And it's like that's a descriptor, and it didn't matter if it was in the wine or not. If I thought this was the style of wine, I was just like, yeah, using that word. And you were kind of educated, because the way that you have to do your exams, you're educated to just, if it's this wine, write this word. It's just like, but I don't get it. It's just like, no, write this word. And so for bourbon, I get chewy. And I always, and I shouldn't, but any high proof bourbon, I'm like, oh, it's nice and chewy. It's going, it's good.
I mean, it's not as relevant there because all bourbon tastes the same. So you can come at I actually love bourbon, but they're going to come at me now. I can see it wouldn't be.
I think your allocation of Pappy and BTAC is just. Yeah. I think there's a delete button there. I can just.
That's right. That's least of my problems. The way the
look at you flexing, Milne.
Light up after me saying that is I'm going to have more problems than just not having any Pappy Van Winkle this year.
Well, you've got none, so it's fine. It's okay. It's deleted. Yeah.
Sorry. Obviously,
Becky,
I do apologise.
What is your overuse? Becky, what is your overused word?
So I'd probably, a lot of my experiences in Scotch, and the one I try to use as many variations and get as specific on this note as possible, because it comes up in nearly every single whiskey, and that's apple. Apple is in everything. So I'm like, okay, well, what kind of apple is that? Is that green apple skin? Is it cooked apple? How is it cooked? Is it stewed or baked? Is it apple pie? Is it apple crumble? The apple compote?
No. The spices on top of the apple pie.
Apple coulis on top of the apple crumble with a side of apple pie.
Slightly stewed, then baked, then compoted.
Apple and pear and that kind of fruitiness is such an inherent quality to so many Scotch whiskies. It comes up in nearly everything, and because obviously we eat a lot of apples in England, it's always there. So I'm like, okay, I need to make sure that not all of my reviews are just the same thing. So what kind of apple is it? But actually,
you're gonna have a whiteboard of words. It's just like, tick it off every time you say the word. It's just like, I said that too much. You've said it 4 times this month. I have
started. I have started. I have a spreadsheet.
Of course.
No, I really need it.
Of aromas and flavors, and they're all divided into like different camps, and different types of flavor are within there. So there's like fruit, but then there's all of the different variations of apple that I've just said, and then there's the pears, and then there's bramble fruit, there's orchard fruit, bramble fruit, and then there's the different kind of spices, and then like any bready quality, any sweet quality, which is all the caramel stuff, and then there's a texture column. And whenever I'm tasting a whiskey, I'm like, there's something, and I can't put my finger on it. What is that? And I'll just go through my spreadsheet and be like, oh yes, that's the one.
It's super helpful, because I had that in the wine studies. It's like you had like a list. It's like, is it this? And I always, when I was educating people on wine, it's just like, you start at the top and then you work your way down. But the problem is the less and less you do it, and I sit on a wine panel once a month, and that's it. And so it gets to the point, it's just like, yeah, it's stone fruit. I'm like, I don't know stone fruit. So I'm like, yeah, it's stone fruit. Go with that. And it's, you hit a ceiling. It's just like, shit. I can't remember all the green fruits and the orchard fruits and the stone fruits. And it's like, shit, I don't know what these are. It's just like, well,
I don't think Andy knows.
And you start higher.
But I think it's better to be vague. Then you agree it's better to be vague than to be too specific and weird. Like all of these weird notes about like, oh, I'm getting this like really rare tea note that only grows in the foothills of the Himalayan jungle.
It's like an
I'm at the US. We mastered the weird note.
Than weird and specific. I'd like to throw to our Scotch Malt Whisky Society.
It's like an autumnal walk where you're wearing baggy jeans and loose clothing and a linen shirt.
Yeah.
With eau de parfum from Paco Rabanne. It's
Smoky Harbour fish supper.
Carrying your smoked kippers.
What's wrong with that?
As you walk through a meadow.
Nothing wrong with that. So
you know what? The one I use the most is I still use the word either funky or farmyardy when I'm actually assessing some Scotch whiskey notes, because I love that in a Scotch whiskey. Like if I hear that, like that sort of almost like Glen Scotia kind of Brookladdy notes that you get of that funky farmyardy, wet hay bales and horse saddle kind of notes. So that's probably what I use a lot, but I love that in a whiskey though.
I use
how many saddles have you sat on?
A few.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Is this
I love the horse saddle.
Have you sat on? I'll write that down. Yeah.
Yeah, no, write that down.
One of my worst.
The horse saddle and used leather term is used so much. There's like so few people actually have sat on a horse or like have had that smell. And it's just like, how can you use
leather?
it?
So it's actually
that's an Australian thing.
No, it's on a horse, like on a saddle, and a saddle of a horse. So leather. The
smell of a saddle, the smell of a used saddle, like a saddlery.
So the horses sweat onto the leather, and
it's
it is
up
actually
on the beach, not Grew up in the countryside, you know.
A dog.
It's quite a specific smell when a horse sweats into leather. And that's what the sweaty saddle or like a horse saddle smells like. One of my worst tasting notes I've ever written, but I still think it's one of the best, was that smells like Saturday night polishing my saddle with beeswax before Pony Club on a Sunday.
Pony Club. Gee.
Right. But now I've learned, and I just write delicious. How was it? It was delicious. That's my most overused word in whiskey, purely because I love it, or I'm not a fan of it, and I just think that everyone should have that journey.
And
that's why I always use it's delicious.
It's a perfect note that segues from Matt Willer. It's like I've no idea what heather smells like, and I've never smelled it in Australia. But you walk to certain areas of Scotland, you walk in and it's just heather fields for fucking miles. It's like, what do you smell? It's like nothing but heather, and it is so distinct and unique. But if you're not there, and it's like blackcurrant leaf is the other one. It's like blackcurrant leaf is a lot in wine. It's just like, oh yeah, blackcurrant leaf. It's like I've never seen blackcurrants, let alone blackcurrant leaves.
We also have the same thing, like in the UK, we use Christmas cake a lot to talk about sherry, but Asian countries don't have Christmas cake. So it's like for them, it's like, oh, we use it all the time. Like, oh, that lovely sherry like Christmas cake. No, you're getting, and in Asian countries, like, what's Christmas cake? What is that?
Even when you try and describe the fruits in it, and you go raisins, prunes, dates, and like, no, they don't exist. It's like shit.
If you say Christmas cake in Australia, we'll be like pavlova.
Yeah.
I think that's.
What are you talking about?
I think that's New Zealand's Christmas cake, not Australia's.
Can we shut him up? Where's the mute button?
Where's the mute button for him? I know that we were only meant to ask one, but I really want to ask one of the Proust questions. So I did the Proust, I think it was back in 2019 for Whiskey Ardent, and it was one of my favourite interviews I've ever written on paper. It was amazing. So many awesome questions. Like some of them were like, who's the whiskey love of your life? If you could only work in one distillery, what would it be? And Becky, because you've been one of my heroes in the industry, I want to ask you, who is your hero in whiskey?
Oh, wow. That's a good question.
Yes.
This podcast is sponsored by
I've never thought about that before. That is
And Kaya.
Okay, I'm not going to choose one person. I want to choose. Oh God, this is going to sound really tacky, but I genuinely have so much respect for every single woman who has blazed a trail doing their own thing in whichever part of whiskey that they're working in, whether that's marketing and communications or spirit distillation or blending or teaching or writing. I think it's all of the women who've come before us. They have blazed a trail for us to succeed. They've done all of this groundwork. So for me, without them, I don't think we'd be where we are now. So they're my heroes. I've got so much respect for all of the women who've done the hard work and had to put up with so much worse than we've had. And we're sitting here talking about it today, but they had it so much worse. So I have so much respect for those women. So they're all my heroes.
There you go. Good answer. Awesome.
Excellent answer. Becky, we asked you for an hour and we've gone way over time, so I do apologise. Thank you for hanging around. We like to poke fun at people here on the Whiskey Roundtable, and certainly we've poked fun at wanky tasting notes. But anyone who's watched more than one episode of this will know that I am the chief wanker of this show, and I'll let you into a little bit of a secret for a tasting note I wrote for a Port Charlotte once, a car sample. We didn't end up bottling it because it was a bit cost prohibitive. But you know when you walk into a field on a farm and it's a dairy farm and there's cows and they get scared and they freeze and they look at you and there's a certain smell of sweat that comes off that cow at that point, and it was exactly what I smelt in this Port Charlotte. And I was so looking forward to bottling it, but it was just going to be too expensive at the time. So awesome. I am the chief wanker of this group, just to make that clear.
Confirmed.
But really important. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone who watched this, to Paula, to Peter Bignell from the Belgrove Distillery tuned in. Joel, who I take all the credit for. And we're still waiting on his knighthood, but I'm sure it's coming in the mail. But Gordon Dundas.
I was just saying, shout out to Gordon. I don't think I've heard Gordon in this chat for a long time, but fucking legend.
Oh, wow.
And a wonderful man.
Also,
And if she's still listening and still here, which I doubt because she does find it boring, but my mother-in-law, hello, Sue. She normally starts and then goes, I'm
going to get into that. I was saving that one, Milne, but Gordon's got an excellent answer to this. Hero is Michael Jackson. I got to work with him, learnt so much. I actually referenced a Michael Jackson book from the 80s that I brought out during a Talisker tasting we did last week. We were talking about the silly price Talisker 40. Also, Rachel Barry, her whiskey making ability is amazing. And for those who are interested in the oak barrel, yes, we will be opening all of the Glendronach single casks when they come in. That'll be announced on Monday, that tasting. But yes, Sue Middleton did tune in to this chat. And again, my mother didn't. Everyone else's mother watched this chat. My mother is too busy winning the trivia at the Canobolas Hotel in Orange. That's cool, whatever. I'm still the oldest and the most loved child. But Becky, I know you are very good friends with Milne, very old friends. Did you know that his nickname is Puddles?
Puddles?
Puddles. Oh, I like it when you say it. Yeah.
It's not a nickname that came when I was in the UK. So, no.
What is this referred to? What's this referring?
Another weird thing that happened.
That's what we have time for tonight.
I do honestly have one serious question to finish on, and it does, again, refer to Andy Puddles Milne, is we were talking about it before we went live, the accent. For those who may be listening back home, has Andy Milne gone full Australian in his twang?
Trying not to. But
yeah, that's a nod.
We need more problems in the chat so that I can be British.
Yeah. Pile them in, Andy. That's how to get them on your side. That's how to get them on your side. Come on.
The fact you're referring to us as yourself as a POM, Andy, shows how much you've integrated.
I know my audience, all right? I know my audience.
Locked in.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. This has been Andy Milne's left. He might be back for episode 7, but it's been such a great way to kick off the season. We know that we took probably a little bit longer break than we expected, but we want to come back with a bang this year. To all my lovable idiots on the round table, but particularly to Becky, who has been so generous with her time and with all the lead up to this, in terms of emailing back and forth and making this happen. It's such a pleasure to be able to meet you virtually and have a chat, and long may you have a long and strong career in this silly game we call whiskey, because you're an inspiration to everyone.
Agreed.
Thank you, Scott. Guys, thank you so much for having me on. This has been probably one of the funnest whiskey chats that I've had. It's been hilarious.
Tell your friends.
Bring the fun. It's been amazing. Thank you.
We've been talking shit for nearly a year now, guys.
Yeah.
That's how scary this is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alex's mum is here.
Finally! Come on, Mum. She's away at the moment.
So,
guys, just quickly before I go, I'm heading on a New South Wales Victoria road trip in the next couple of weeks. So any distilleries or anything like that would happily take me for a pop-in. I need to get some copper porn time in my life, please. So I'd love to pop in and see any of Australian distilleries between Bendigo and Sydney. So hit me up, send me a DM, but I'd love to catch up and see you all, as many as I can fit in on my way home.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I'm going to take nude still photos.
Oh, that was that calendar. We didn't get that calendar off the thing.
Yeah. No.
And also, we spent 2 weeks planning this episode and good, but I assure you, everyone, that we're back to regular service, that we will figure out next week's episode at about 6 p.m. next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. It's descending to silliness as it normally does. We will see you all maybe next week. I don't know. Have we thought about next week? Maybe week after?
Yeah. We'll see you next week, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Cheers, gang.